Welcome to Dwayne's Guitar Lessons. I'm instructor Dwayne Jenkins. In today's video lesson, we're going to be talking about a question that I get asked a lot. A lot of people ask me over the years, some of my students ask me things like, how can you tell which notes are in your keys? Which sharps and flats are in your keys? When you start learning like music theory, it can get a little complicated because there's all this stuff involved. But in reality, it's not really that difficult if you know a couple little key elements, okay? So if you're interested in finding out what sharps and flats are in each key, okay, you just have to know two things. Just two things. You can break it down into two secrets, and you will be able to figure out the sharps and flats in any key, okay? It's kind of like the circle of fifths. You look at that and you think, geez, or the circle of fourths. Some people call it circle of fourths. It looks real confusing. But in reality, it doesn't have to be that confusing. It really doesn't, if you just know two simple things, okay? So if you're interested in learning a little bit about some music theory, a little bit of unlocking some of the mysteries of the fretboard, give me a few minutes of your time. I'll show you these two secrets and it'll unlock the mystery for you. So let's take a look.
Audio Jungle.
All right, now there was two things I said you need to know, okay? Just two simple things, and you're going to be able to figure out what sharps and flats are in any key, okay? Number one, first thing you need to know is you need to know the scientific formula. I know I'm left-handed, so you can't really see this, but when I move my hand away, you'll know. Okay, scientific formula, and what that is, it's W, H, W, 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 H, okay? Now, music theory is a science of mathematics, okay? So, that's what you want to think about, okay? This is your scientific formula, all right? Now you say, well, what does this mean? Well, what it means, W, 2 frets, is a whole step equals whole step. That's what it stands for. And this equals 2 frets, okay? So if you're playing a note and you move 2 frets, whether it's up the fretboard or down the fretboard, that's considered a whole step, okay? Some books and some stuff you see those might have a different name for it, but it's a whole step, okay? So 2 frets is a whole step, okay? The H stands for half step, which equals 1 fret. Okay, so if you move from one note to the next, just 1 fret, that's going to be considered a half step, okay? And if you move, let's say, 3 frets, what would that be? That would be a whole step and a half. If you moved 4 frets, that would be 2 whole steps, okay? If you moved 5 frets, that'd be 2 and a half, okay? Makes sense, pretty simple to understand, right? So we just have to remember, whole step, half step, okay? Now how does this relate to our major scale? Well, if you look, we're going to show you real quick here. Let's say we'll say an A for an, okay, so that's the first thing we need to learn before we get to that. Okay, the second thing we need to know, okay, is we need to know that our relative minor is going to be 3 frets down from our major. It's going to be 3 frets down from any major, which means that if you're playing, let's say, A at the 5th fret on the 6th string, and I highly recommend you know your notes. If you don't know your notes, make sure you learn them. It's very, very important, especially if you're going to be studying music theory. Let's say you're on A at the 5th fret. You go down 3 frets. You're going to be at F sharp. F sharp is a relative minor of A major. Okay, and the reason why it's considered relative is because they're going to be the same notes, and I'm going to give you an example of that in just a second. Okay, so those are the two things that you have to remember. Number one, your scientific formula for the major scale: whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And number two, your relative minor, which is 3 frets down from any major on the fretboard. Doesn't matter where you're at. I don't care if you're at the 8th fret, the 10th fret, if you're on the 4th string, the 3rd string, the 5th, it doesn't matter. Your relative minor is always going to be 3 frets down from the major, okay? So you understand these two things, you can find the notes to any major scale, and you'll also be able to find it to any relative minor as well. Okay, so let's take a look at this in a little more detail. Now let's take our A major for instance, okay? Key A major, okay? So we'll say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, okay? Now we want to know, is there any sharps or flats in here? Now a sharp and a flat are the same thing, okay? It just depends on what direction you're moving. If you're moving up the fretboard, it's going to be a sharp. If you're moving down, it's going to be a flat. So a sharp and a flat are the same thing, okay? The same exact note, just depends on what direction you're moving in, okay? So, now if we look at our scientific formula here, we say, well, there's a whole step between the 1 and the 2. Okay, so if we give these ones a number value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, this is going to tell us the distance between the notes. So according to this, we have a whole step between the first and the 2, another whole step between the 2 and the 3. We have a half step between the 3 and the 4, a whole step again, another whole step, and a half step. Okay, that's our scientific formula for that. All right. Now, how does that help us determine the notes? Well, if we look at this, we know, if you know your notes, there's a whole step between the A and the B, so we know there's no sharp there. Now, the B and the C are normally next to each other. So according to this, it's a whole step. So that tells us that C is going to be a C sharp. It's going to have to be a C sharp to fit in with that, okay? Now, since we have a half step between these two notes, then that's going to be a natural D, because that would be a half step, okay? So we have a D, now we have a whole step to the E. That's naturally a whole step, so there's no sharp there. Then we have another whole step from the E to the F. Naturally, the E and the F would be next to each other, so that tells us that we have an F sharp for it to fit into that formula. And then we have a whole step between the F sharp and the G, so right off the bat, that's going to be a G sharp as well. And then we have a half step between this note and this one, which lines up perfect, which means that we're back to A again. So this tells us that in the key of A, we have 3 sharps: C sharp, F sharp, G sharp. Okay? See, we didn't even need our guitar or nothing. You don't need your guitar. You just need to understand this stuff. It's pretty simple once you kind of get the secret down, all right? You understand this magical formula. It works for any major key, okay? So then we say, well, how do we know the notes to the relative minor? Well, one thing that's really cool about guitars, and music in general, really, is that your relative minor is going to be the same exact notes, okay? Same exact notes. So then if we know these notes, then we can tell us what this formula is going to be. So we're kind of doing it backwards, okay? So let's look at our relative minor, which is going to be our F sharp. F sharp minor, okay? So now if we come up here and we go F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have 8 notes in a key, any key, doesn't matter what it is. Now according to this up here, we already know our sharps. So we already know there's going to be a C sharp. We already know there's going to be an F sharp. We already know there's going to be a G sharp. Okay. So then we say, okay, what is the scientific formula? Okay, well, right off the bat, if you have an F to its G sharp, and then there's an F sharp too. Sorry about that. Yes, right here. Okay, so we know there's a whole step between these two notes. G sharp to A, that's going to be a half step. From an A to a B, that's going to be a whole step. B to a C sharp, that's going to be another whole step. C sharp to D is going to be a half step. D to E is going to be a whole step. And then E to an F sharp is going to be another whole step. So, right off the bat, now we know the formula for the minor. Okay, so as you can see, these are 2 different keys, your F sharp minor and your A major, and they have the same notes. They're in a different, you know, a little bit different order because of the key that you're in, but they're the same notes, okay? Now you know the scientific formula for the major scale, and you now know the scientific formula for the minor scale, okay? Now will this work in any key? Well, let's find out. Let's try it in another key, okay? Let's say D major, for instance, okay? So we got D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, okay? Each one of these at number value, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? Now what we need to do is find out those sharps, right? Once again, we know our formula up here. We know we got whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, okay? So, D to E, there's a whole step, so we know there's not a sharp there. E to F would normally be a half step because they're next to each other, but since it's a whole step, we can honestly say that's going to be a sharp there. Okay. Half step between the F sharp and the G, so that means that we're going to have a natural G. Whole step between the G and the A, no sharp there. Whole step between the A and the B is whole step. There's no sharp there. Whole step between the C and B and the C. Now naturally the B and the C wouldn't be next to each other, but since we have it as a whole step, that tells us there's going to be a C sharp here. Okay, and then we have a half step between these two notes, which would be C sharp back to D. So that can tell us that we have two sharps on this key. The F sharp and the C sharp. Okay. Now like we talked about, if we go down 2 frets, okay, 2 frets, or I'm sorry, not 2 frets, 3 frets, okay, from our D. So we have our D. That's going to tell me that we're going to go to B minor. If you go down 3 frets on your fretboard, if you look at your fretboard and you know where D is at the 10th fret, and you go down 3 frets, you're going to end up on the B note. So that tells me that we're on a B minor, okay? So we come here to B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, okay? And we know our formula up here is a whole step, a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, okay? So that should tell us what the sharps are, and those sharps should line up with these. So let's see if it does. Well, the whole step between the B and the C would be a C sharp. Half step between the C and the C sharp and the D, that means a natural D. Whole step between the D and the next note, D and the E, there's no sharp there. Then we have a whole step between the E and the F. These are naturally next to each other, so that tells us that we're going to have an F sharp there. A half step between these two notes, which tells us there's no sharp there. A whole step between these two notes, so there's no sharp there, and a whole step between these two notes. So that's C. We have a C sharp and an F sharp, which is exactly the same thing as here, C sharp, F sharp. So as you can tell, this works, okay? This is what you want. All you have to do is master this, and you can find any key, any sharp to any key, and its relative minor. And as you can see from what we just talked about, this lines up. So all you have to remember, scientific formula for your major scale, and that your relative minor is going to be 3 frets down from your relative major. All right, so there you have it. So it's 2 simple ways to find any sharps or flats in any key, okay? It's not that difficult. I know when you look at books on theory and stuff, man, they make that stuff way complicated, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. It really doesn't. If you just know those 2 things that I showed you, okay? Remember that scientific formula, okay? And it's like knowing 1 + 1 = 2, and it's the same every single time. 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. It's not going to equal 4. It's not equal 7, 12, 11. You know, it's not. 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. This is a scientific formula that's going to work every single time. And if you just master that formula, you can find any sharps and flats, any notes to any major key. And like I said, if you know your notes and you know the 3 frets down on the fretboard, okay, so here's your A at the 5th fret. You go down 3 notes, boom, there's your F sharp minor, okay? Any chord, I don't care what it is. This is an E on the 5th string, okay? E major, if this was your E major, you go down 3 frets. Now you're at C sharp minor, okay? So what I would recommend doing is getting a piece of paper like I showed you and write it out. You know, write out that formula, okay? Figure out the sharps, go down 3 frets, figure out what the minor is going to be, write it down just like I showed you in the lesson, and you're going to see, you're going to find it. That's very easy. It's not that difficult, okay? So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for future notifications. Like the video. Be sure to visit my website at dwaynesguitarlessons.com for a lot of great training tips there, and sign up to my email guitar club. And when we do our next lesson, keep practicing because it's real important, okay? This stuff, you got to keep studying it all the time. Keep it up here in your head, all right? So you have yourself a good one, and we'll see you next time.